Not the most reliable 22, but definitely a lot of fun to shoot. This is the Model 31 Jc Higgins. Now this was sold by Sears and Roebuck. Now a buddy of mine brought this to me and said, hey, I was having some issues with it. The trigger doesn't function. Would you take a look at it? So I took it apart. I could tell it was never cleaned. I actually took a bore snake down the barrel and a poof came out. It was ridiculously dirty. I actually looked down the barrel. You could not see any resemblance of rifling. I thought maybe this thing had been shot out. But once I cleaned it out, it seemed like it had some good rifling in it. Once I started cleaning up the barrel, this was all that was left. The rust had eaten all the bluing away. So it may need to get refinished at some point, or it's going to just continuously rust. Now when he came to me, he said that he tried fixing it, and when he took the trigger assembly apart, springs just started to shoot out. Now I didn't have this experience when I took it out, so I'm not sure if he was talking about the disconnector spring or what he was talking about, but I did notice that the trigger bar, or the disconnector I should say, was not engaging properly into the sear. And so what was happening was this disconnector was pointed downwards. That little peg that engages in the sear right here was pointed downwards, and while you're pulling the trigger, it would not come close to hitting this little piece. So it was pretty much not an active trigger. So I had to take it and bend it slightly up so that it would engage in the sear. I definitely do not recommend modifying firearms this old, but there's a lot of these parts that you can buy and they're not really expensive, so I thought, you know, if I mess this up, at least I can replace it with another part. But as you can see, I got it to work, and I bet a lot of people are cringing by how I got it to work. How it all works is right here is where the round goes in, and then the lifter lowers down to accept the cartridge popping backwards. And so as the bolt's coming backwards, it hits that piece of metal, which lifts the cartridge up to be chambered. And in theory, hopefully it's ejecting the other shell, but a lot of times it doesn't. That's one of the issues it has, is you have to kind of figure out how to get the round out of the chamber and, you know, work with this guy being ready to feed, and the bolt has no lock open. So the next round is ready to feed. It hits this part with the bolt, so it hits like that. As it's going forward, round is getting chambered up, hits forward, and it's down to accept the next round. So one thing I've noticed about this firearm is you need hotter rounds to cycle it, and I'm kind of wondering if it's because this adds more resistance to the bolt. I mean, you don't have just the recoil spring to fight, you also have this little spring. As soon as I went over to this Federal Ammunition 40 grain bullets, the firearm shot phenomenally. It did have some issues and it wasn't 100% reliable, but it definitely is a lot more reliable than it was. One thing I really do appreciate about this firearm is that it's tube fed. There's something cool about loading in the tube instead of a magazine. Plus, it's a lot more relaxing. It always seems painful to pull on those little tabs on the magazines, or you just plop them in and you're ready to go. And it is a pretty fun gun once it's working. All right, so like I said, 40 grain bullets seem to work a lot better. It likes Federal ammunition. Now, I shot some Federal 36 grain, and it seemed to feed that the best out of the 36 grain bullets, but it definitely had a lot of problems. As soon as I went over to 40 grain bullets, it performed a lot better. Now, it still had its hiccups, but most of the time it was not, a failure to chamber. Most of the time it was a failure to extract. Sometimes it didn't make the round go off, sometimes because we had some really crappy rounds out there that sometimes would not go off. But yeah, most of the time it wasn't a failure to feed. So I shot some Federal ammunition through it. It seemed to like that stuff the best. 36 grain wasn't the most reliable of the group, but it definitely was the most reliable of the 36 grain bullets. Now, as soon as I switched over to Federal 40 grain bullets, this thing ran pretty well. I mean, for a gun that's had about 400 rounds through it, it was doing pretty good. It has a standard cross bolt safety. Sights are kind of sparse. To adjust for elevation, you just, and then to move back, there you go. The charging handle, when you first see it, you think it's going to be hard to hold on to, but since it's a 22, it's not bad, but that rounded edge, it makes it so you can slip off of it pretty easily. But once you get used to it and you know to push kind of this way into the receiver to hold on to it, it's not bad. It's got this kind of quirky sling that retracts into the stock. I think it's kind of cool. When you pull it out, I always think of Santa Claus's suspenders when I see it. But it's kind of worn out. As you can see, it barely wants to retract. Sometimes it has more power than other times. It's like an old seat belt is the best way I can explain it. Sometimes you have to take this stock off to help it, but if it'll ever get back in there, you can do it. And it retracts back in. Now, how this attaches at the top is there's a triangular shape right here. And so you pull the sling out and you can see there's a triangular shape right here that matches up with this. So to get it on, you just go upside down like this, put it on, twist it. You have a sling that feels very flimsy. But it's kind of a cool idea, but once you start messing around with it and you realize that it's kind of finicky, like an old seatbelt, you can kind of see why that more modern firearms do not incorporate it. But it's kind of a cool idea at very least. I think it hangs up a little bit in there, and it's a worn out spring. I mean, these were sold by Sears and Roebuck in the 1950s. I mean, this is an old rifle that went through a couple generations and definitely was shot. So disassembly isn't as nice as modern day firearms, but it's not bad. You take out this screw, which I wish I had a better size screwdriver for this, but you take this out, and this is the cross pin also that holds the trigger assembly in place. So you can just pull it out. And then if you want to take the handguard off, there's another screw right here. And you can take this out, which this is a lot smaller of a screw, as you can see. And then this whole foregrip comes off. All right. So now that that's taken out, you can see where that screw used to be. This trigger assembly comes out. Now you can further take it apart by taking the bolts out. I recommend taking this plunger out first so that it's one less thing in the way. But you just pull back on this, up and out, and then the charging handle is just sitting in there. It is. Now, would I recommend this thing for a squirrel gun? No, I really would not. I would not recommend this for anything other than, you know, going out to the range and plinking. This is definitely something that, you know, if your grandfather owned this and you're taking your son out to shoot, it'd be kind of fun to shoot. But at the same time, I recommend a 10-22 over this any day. Hello, I'm a man round. I make your fun go away. Yay!
You jackass.